What's up, guys? This is Alex with Unlock Your Wellness. Today's video is about mineral balancing and hair tissue mineral analysis for nervous system conditions like dysautonomia, POTS, MCAS, and histamine intolerance. Let's get into it. Dysautonomia is essentially dysfunction of the autonomic nervous system, or ANS. And there are two different branches of the autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. Parasympathetic is your rest and digest branch, and sympathetic is fight or flight branch. So our brain subconsciously chooses which branch is appropriate given the circumstances of our environment, what's happening around us. And in dysautonomia, that ability is completely destroyed. It's disrupted. And you don't really understand and fully comprehend how important this part of your body is until you know that it's not functioning well, because everything is really downstream of your nervous system sending signals and basically telling your body what to do. Your nervous system controls all of your other organs and systems. So this is a major problem, and it is probably the most painful and difficult chronic health condition you can ever experience. That's just my opinion, though. And a form or manifestation of dysautonomia is postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, or POTS. This is more specifically related to the heart and the cardiovascular system. There's basically an excessive tachycardia response. There's extra heart activity. One can experience lightheadedness, fainting, weakness, blood pooling in the lower body and getting like purple feet and legs, heart palpitations, and having shortness of breath. So MCAS and histamine intolerance are conditions involving histamine. Okay, so histamine is a molecule that's involved with the immune system and mast cells. Mast cells are a part of the immune system. Histamines also function as a neurotransmitter, among many other things. Digestive support, helping with the immune system, the nervous system. And so MCAS is essentially excess activation of the mast cells, mast cell activation syndrome. Okay, so mast cells are overreacting. They're releasing way too much histamine. And if your body doesn't have the resources and the strength to clear out this excess histamine that's being released, then you're going to build up a really high load of histamine. Your histamine bucket is going to fill up. And until you drain the histamine bucket, you're going to have all sorts of problems. People get into this trap of not being able to clear the excess histamine that's being ingested or liberated from poor diet. It can be from stress. It can be from a high toxic load. It can be from microbial overgrowth or imbalance. Maybe you don't have the microbes that are needed to clear the histamine and sort of eat the histamine as it's coming in. So most commonly, people get conditions of the skin. They can get anxiety disorders. They have weight gain. They have trouble sleeping, but it can really manifest in countless different ways. And the amount of people that have histamine intolerance has completely ballooned even in the past 20 to 30 years. This was not a condition we used to see even in like the 80s and 90s. And now tons of people have histamine intolerance. It's crazy. It's really crazy. So mineral balancing is a nutrition science that uses a hair tissue mineral analysis, HTMA, to measure a person's mineral levels, mineral ratios, what their current stress levels are, and how well they're tolerating stress, and also their load and burden of heavy metals. And the hair test provides a very unique view of a person's chemistry and what's happening in their body. And it tells us what nutrients are going to be necessary and important to bring their body back into balance. Bringing a person into balance and homeostasis is very important, allowing them to make energy efficiently. When a person's body is in balance, it can eliminate toxins, it can cleanse itself, right? It can function well. When the body is out of balance, it cannot, right? And then you build up a load of toxicity over time, over years and decades. The patterns that we can see by looking at somebody's hair test tells us a lot about what a person is experiencing internally. And oftentimes, a practitioner like myself can actually predict, sort of like a psychic would, in describing exactly how they feel. And that's because the hair test never lies. The hair is basically an expression of us inside, right? We express the hair out of us. So it tells us a lot about what's happening in our life and how we are responding to our environment. Mineral balancing and hair tissue mineral analysis, as we know it today, are the accumulation of three brilliant minds: Dr. George Watson, Hans Selye, and Dr. Paul Eck. Dr. George Watson is responsible for coining the term oxidation rate. He was working with a number of different patients who were very unwell, and he discovered that some of his patients did better with carbohydrates than others did. So he started examining this and eventually categorized people into two different groups: slow oxidizers and fast oxidizers. And he was able to correct both parties, both sides, and their imbalances by basically giving them specific foods, specific nutrients, specific supplementation. And he got incredible results just by doing these things. Their physical, mental, and emotional symptoms really improved in a big way. You can essentially think of the oxidation rate, as Dr. George Watson defined it, how well your engine or your metabolism is running, how quickly, how slowly your engine is running, right? How quickly are you burning through your nutrients? And we have Hans Selye, who is most well known for his theories on stress. And he clearly defined 3 different stages of stress that a living organism and a body goes through. Stage 1 is the alarm stage. This is the initial stage that a person goes through when they're experiencing stress. They will release acute medullary hormones like aldosterone from the adrenals to support the stress. And stage number 2 is the resistance stage. So if you remain in stress for too long, your body starts to shift the way that it responds to the stress. It will stop releasing the acute medullary hormones and start releasing the corticosteroid hormones like cortisol to continue to support the stress as it's happening. If you stay in the stress for too long, you're going to enter the exhaustion stage. And this is when the body starts to break down because it cannot support the stress response anymore. It's running out of raw materials and nutrients, and you basically start going into burnout. And finally, we have Dr. Paul Eck. Dr. Eck is the man, the brilliant mind that brought all of this information together into how we know mineral balancing and HTMA to be. So he founded analytical research labs in Phoenix, Arizona in the 1980s. And he built upon Dr. Watson and Hans Selye's findings and theories. He was actually able to identify both the oxidation rates and the stages of stress that a person was in or would be in using the hair test, using the hair samples that he would take from people. And he repeated this information and these findings over hundreds of thousands of hair tests over decades. And he was actually able to determine and clearly define what the ideal levels for all the minerals, all these essential nutrients. And this is so incredibly important for us to identify and use for us to achieve health, right? Because we're not moving towards a sort of vague range. We're moving towards an optimum. And through his research and practice, he was able to help many people heal from chronic health conditions, make better energy, live happier, healthier lives, and detox nasty heavy metals using all these modalities that I'll be talking about more in this video. The mineral system that we all have is the smallest part of our physical and chemical makeup. Each mineral or element that you might see, on the periodic table of elements in chemistry class has a different physical and energetic characteristic that makes it what it is. So if we have a certain balance or imbalance or toxicity or deficiency of any of these minerals and metals, that's going to influence and impact the expression of who we are as a living organism, as a human being. So this is very important to how we live, right? And how we feel and whether we feel good or bad. The minerals and the metals are all very similar in chemical structure. This is known as ionic mimicry. So if you have a deficiency of an essential mineral, for example, you're more likely to accumulate a toxic heavy metal because your body needs something in place of the deficiency. You will pick up lead in place of calcium if the lead is available. You having the lead operating at a much less efficient level is still better than being dead from not having enough of the raw materials you need. Mineral imbalances and deficiencies lead to heavy metal accumulation, which ultimately leads to dis-ease. So by balancing the minerals, we can reverse the mineral imbalances that led to the heavy metal accumulation in the first place. We're optimizing your ability to make energy by balancing the ratios and giving you sufficient amounts of the minerals. And that is really what will lead to health and wellness more than anything else, as you'll see in this presentation. Heavy metals. These are the most poisonous things in our entire universe. And unfortunately, in the modern day, we are being bombarded with them constantly. Okay, so I'm not going to go through each one of them because that would take a long time, but just know you're exposed to these on the daily. And if you can identify certain exposure vectors that you might have, you will serve yourself tremendously in the long run. Aluminum is the most abundant and ubiquitous metal in our environment. Every single hair test that I've ever seen and analyzed has had elevated aluminum. Okay, so it's very unfortunate that we cannot get away from the aluminum, but this just emphasizes even more how important it is to be eating to nourish yourself and to protect yourself against these metals. So pause the video. You can take a look at these metals and where you accumulate them, where you get them. Heavy metals are the biggest disruptors of all to good health. They are the most poisonous things in our entire universe. And they can disrupt your mineral system, especially if you have deficiencies of the minerals. But even if you have sufficient amounts, they're still not going to be ideal to have around. Measuring your total burden of heavy metals is very difficult. Blood tests will not give any sort of accurate reading whatsoever. You actually get a better sense of this by getting a hair test done. There's a theory that the blood-brain barrier has actually evolved to regulate your minerals and keep the heavy metals and the toxins out of your brain. Your brain is actually oriented around letting the minerals in, the right stuff, the good things, and regulating your neurotransmitters, which is basically influencing how you experience life and whether your autonomic nervous system is going to function well. Unfortunately, as you accumulate more and more metals, they usually go to the brain and the nervous system, which are fatty tissues. And so the metals are basically fat-soluble toxins, so they settle in the brain, and it does this after your liver and your kidneys can't keep up with detoxing. And that's relevant for these conditions that we're talking about today. With regards to dysautonomia, heavy metals are so disruptive and poisonous that they can actually cause lasting wiring in the limbic system, which is basically the part of your brain that governs the autonomic nervous system, and it can totally throw off the balance and cause the autonomic dysfunction. So mercury and lead are the two worst culprits. I have some studies listed here. Mercury especially can cause uptake of glutamate, which basically stimulates the sympathetic branch of the nervous system. And lead as well has been shown to disrupt autonomic tone. So don't underestimate how heavy metals might be part of your picture if you have these conditions. They truly are impacting everyone in varying degrees. And if you have a condition as serious as dysautonomia or mast cell activation, heavy metals are definitely in the picture to some degree. Let's look at a hair test, shall we? First off, top left corner, we have the primary minerals: calcium, magnesium, sodium, and potassium. We also have the trace minerals. We have the toxic heavy metals and other ultra trace minerals. And at the bottom, we have the different mineral ratios, which is most important information on the hair test. We're trying to correct these mineral ratios, and that's really what gets the results in the end. As I said, the ratios are super important, and we have ideal levels of all the minerals and ideal ratio amounts of the different minerals themselves. And we don't want to solely look at the individual levels of all the minerals by themselves. We actually want to look at the entire test as one entity, because all the minerals have different relationships with one another. They can be synergistic, they can be antagonistic. For example, copper is a calcium synergist, zinc is a sodium antagonist. So this is why it's extra important that we give a person the exact balance of nutrients that are going to actually support them in feeling better and making energy well. And with regards to the oxidation rate and calculating it on the hair test, we can do that by measuring calcium and magnesium, which are like the brakes on your metabolism, and sodium and potassium, which are like the gas. Visually on the test, if we see that calcium and magnesium are higher than sodium and potassium, that person is in slow oxidation. If the opposite is true, that person is in fast oxidation. The ratios on a hair test actually tells us a lot more about what a person is experiencing chemically. It tells us what's happening hormonally in a person's body. And that's way different data that we get from a blood serum test on hormones. The reason why that is because hair tissue mineral analysis is a cellular test, right? The hair is a tissue. And so that's going to reflect more accurately what's happening in your tissues, which is really what matters. Your blood is going to be shifting all the time, and your body keeps the blood clean at the expense of the tissues. So it's going to stuff the garbage in your tissues, kind of like you're stuffing things into the closet so that you can deal with it later. If the blood was full of toxins, it would cause a ton of problems. It would damage all of your organs very quickly. So a hair tissue test is actually measuring the endpoint effect the cellular effect of your hormones, your thyroid hormones, your adrenal hormones, insulin, and more. In general, we can tell how well a person is responding to stress based on what's happening with their hormones. And for dysautonomia, this is invaluable information because a person's endocrine system, a person's hormones, is going to be completely distorted and messed up in an autonomic disorder like dysautonomia, right? Because the nervous system is controlling the release of the hormones. So the two most important data points that we find on a hair test are the oxidation rate, which is how well your engine or your metabolism is running, and also the ratio between sodium and potassium, or Na/K. This is basically telling us how well you are tolerating stress, where on the stages of stress from Selye you are at. So if these two data points are out of balance, you are not going to function well because you can't make and utilize energy well at a cellular level if these things are out of balance. This is completely foundational to your experience as a living organism. We can help support this and balance this by using mineral balancing. Mineral balancing is optimizing cellular energy by balancing the oxidation rate and balancing the sodium to potassium ratio. Every single thing in your metabolism, in your physiology, is downstream of correcting these two ratios. For example, you will use all the food that you're eating, all the nutrients in your food, and all the supplements that you're taking well. They'll actually get into your cells and be utilized well, and that will allow you to eliminate the toxic heavy metals that are causing your life to be hell, that are poisoning your body and your nervous system. As defined by Selye, we can actually tell where a person is at on the stages of stress using the data on the hair test. So we're in balanced oxidation and we have something stressful happen in our lives. The first thing that happens is the sodium to potassium ratio will increase as we release medullary hormones from the adrenals. That puts us in the alarm stage as we increase into fast oxidation. We're putting our foot on the gas and we can push through the stress that we're experiencing. We stay in fast oxidation, we're in the alarm stage, and if we stay in the stage for too long, we're going to start entering the resistance stage. As this is happening, the sodium to potassium ratio decreases as we're releasing more of the corticosteroid hormones like cortisol, and we start slowing down our oxidation rate. The sodium to potassium ratio goes down, and we enter mixed oxidation and the exhaustion stage if we stay in the stress for too long. We are then moving out of fast oxidation and into slow oxidation as the sodium to potassium ratio decreases even further, and our body is going to be pumping out more of those brake minerals like calcium and magnesium to slow us down. Our body is very smart and it doesn't want us to remain in fast oxidation and in a stressful state for too long. So it's going to pump on the brakes instead. Now, if we continue to not get the rest that we need and approach this in the healthiest way, we're going to continue burning through our nutrients. We'll eventually burn through all of our calcium and magnesium stores, and we enter into what's known as a 4 lows pattern, where all 4 of the primary macro minerals are below ideal levels. This is basically the furthest stage of burnout you can be in. And Dr. Paul Eck is the person who identified this pattern, and there's no other way to identify it or diagnose it other than looking at a hair test. So in terms of the oxidation rate, dysautonomia is essentially inflexible oxidation. You're either leaning way far into unhealthy slow oxidation, parasympathetic, or unhealthy fast oxidation, sympathetic. Unhealthy slow oxidation is essentially being in that late stage exhaustion. This is basically the end stage of chronic activation of the sympathetic nervous system, like I just showed you. Unhealthy fast oxidation is not necessarily better, but it often shows that there's more available energy that a person has because they're able to maintain the resistance stage for longer. Being in unhealthy fast oxidation can be caused from having excess stress, having toxic metals like lead and mercury activating the stress response. You could be in an illness, or perhaps there's many other reasons. But correcting the mineral imbalances and eventually eliminating the toxins and the heavy metals helps a person to be more metabolically flexible, and eventually they will settle into healthy, slow oxidation, which is where you want to be. You can move into a stress response, you can move into fast oxidation if you need to, but ideally you're in a mild, slow oxidation. That feels honestly the best, right? You're in a relaxed state. And for MCAS and histamine intolerance, a person's oxidation rate and their NAK ratio reflects the level of permeability in their cells. So if a person is in fast oxidation and or they have a low sodium to potassium ratio, their cells are going to be much more permeable. And that's bad news for somebody with histamine intolerance, because that means that the histamines are going to be getting into the cells more readily. And that means more reactions, more symptoms. It's impossible for you to get this precise information on the oxidation rate and the sodium to potassium ratio without a hair test, right? And even know what you need to do about it. So the hair test is invaluable in a situation like this. And also very important to know is that heavy metals, especially mercury, have been shown to cause excess release of histamines and histamine intolerance in general. There are many other approaches and healing modalities that people recommend and use for these conditions, these chronic conditions of the nervous system. And I have other videos on my channel covering some of these things, like thiamine, supplementation, carnivore diet, keto diet, GAPS diet. And people oftentimes can get some results. They might even get into full remission in some cases. But there's a lot of people that are just not getting what they want from these modalities, from these diets. And I've covered the weaknesses of these things in other videos on my channel. So I'll have video links in the description for all these videos. And I recommend you check them out for yourself for your own education. And the reason why I know firsthand why these modalities haven't worked for people is because between 2022 and 2024, I worked very closely with around 200 people with these chronic nervous system conditions like dysautonomia, POTS, MCAS, chronic fatigue, through the Rebels Rising Dysautonomia program, which is now defunct. Each client in that program went through a very rigorous healing protocol that included some combination of all of those previous modalities that I made videos on that I listed before, in addition to some additional lifestyle things. I got to work with these people very closely. Like I got to see them every week for 2 years. And I saw what worked. I saw what didn't work. I saw who healed and who did not heal. And for those who didn't get better or even got worse in the program, I recommended mineral balancing for them. And they all saw some pretty amazing benefit by getting a hair test and going on a mineral balancing program. It was amazing. This has really confirmed my view on mineral balancing and why I think it's so amazing and so powerful. Because your body is never wrong, right? The organism is never wrong. If a protocol is not working well for you, you're not getting what you need from it, and you're doing it very well, it's not because you're doing it wrong or some other BS reason. It's because your body needs more help and more support. What is the difference between those who are successful with some of those other diets and modalities and those who are not? And it's not because they aren't working hard enough. For example, it could be they're not on the correct macro ratios that's best for their oxidation rate, for balancing their oxidation rate. They might not be addressing specific mineral deficiencies and ratios. They might have really poor energy creation because their adrenals are deficient, their thyroid is sluggish, and those two things are heavily reliant on your mineral levels and your mineral system. They also definitely have heavy metal toxicity that is poisoning their nervous system, and no amount of gut healing ever addresses that fully. And having sluggish detox and drainage pathways will prevent a person from eliminating the heavy metals and eliminating mold, mycotoxins, retroviral, toxic biofilm, and having a really nasty toxic terrain. We need to rapidly change the terrain of the body and have more of an intervention that's built upon the foundation of mineral balancing. And on that note, the best way to do that is by opening up your drainage funnel. Mineral balancing accounts for the top of this funnel, the cellular compartment, getting things in and out of your cells. A lot of these other healing modalities, these diets, address the bottom of the funnel, which is, in fact, the most important part of the funnel, the gut. However, oftentimes this middle part of the funnel is bottlenecked and is not being addressed. We want to make sure that the funnel is completely open so that drainage and detox is easy for a person, and that will allow a person to get well better than anything else. Here are some recommendations you can take. I love the coffee enemas, the binders, and the near-infrared sauna, but there's a number of different ways to go about this. I do think that mineral balancing is really the foundation that makes all of this possible though. So if you are interested in getting a hair test, you want to go on a mineral balancing protocol, or you just want to learn more about mineral balancing, please reach out to me. You have my email there, my website there as well, and you can schedule a free consult with me to have a conversation and we can discuss your health goals and how I can support you. And just know that anything is possible. You can heal from these very difficult chronic health conditions. I've seen it happen and I'm here to support you in accomplishing that. Thank you so much for watching. Take care.